Right, vlog number 2, and time for my first serious attempt at communicating a message through a video medium and posting it to the interwebs. As I mentioned in the first vlog, I have a lot of interest concerning hermeneutics, philosophy, theology, and other aspects. On that note, I wanted to discuss Blade Runner 2049, and in particular Pale Fire. In the sequence near the beginning of that, Joe holds up to the screen for everyone to see as part of the dialogue with his AI companion about whether or not to read. And the book that's held up is called Pale Fire by Vladimir Nabokov. Right? Check it out from the library. What's interesting about this text and then intertextuality, right, is that now this movie has brought this text into itself. And functionally not just as a homage, right? An homage can be blatant and it can be subtle, kind of saying this was a forerunner, this is inspired, or this has been impacted us, if not the film directly or another art media directly. It is a trace, right, or a signifier pointing towards something else, right? But intertextuality suggests another level, at which point a narrative or some component of a sign system, a semiotic system, and its meanings have been brought into to further develop and impart meaning to another new construct, to a different setup, right? So the creators of Blade Runner, they want to somehow provoke and make Pale Fire part of its mythos and the ideas it presents. Now, for those of you that don't know, Pale Fire is a really interesting text. It's structured, it says a novel, but it's structured into 3 distinct parts. A foreword, a poem consisting of 1,000 lines, well, 999, and that's narratively important to the text, and then a commentary on the poem, all of which is fictional, though, all right? And so the novel itself is playing with the nature of textuality and meaning, right? So that when the foreword, written by the fictional character Charles Kimboat, that is commenting upon his friend, his dearly departed friend, and the poem that his friend has written. Note what he says in his foreword. Shade's poem is indeed the sudden flourish of magic. My gray-haired friend, my beloved old conjurer, put a pack of index cards into his hat and shook out a poem, right? Shade, Mr. Shade, Dr. Shade wrote the poem on index cards. Right? To this poem we must now turn. My foreword has been, I trust, not too skimpy. Other notes arranged in a running commentary will certainly satisfy the most voracious reader. Although these notes, in conformity with custom, come after the poem, the reader is advised to consult them first, and then study the poem with their help, rereading them, of course, as he goes through its text, and perhaps after having done with the poem, consulting them a third time, so as to complete the picture. I find it wise in such cases as this to eliminate the bother of back and forth leafings by either cutting out or clipping together the pages with the text of the thing, or, even more simply, purchasing 2 copies of the same work which can be placed in adjacent positions on a comfortable table, not like the shaky little affair on which my typewriter is precariously enthroned now, in this wretched motor lodge, with the carousel inside and the outside my head, miles away from New Way. Let me state that without my notes, Shade's text simply has no human reality at all, since the human reality of such a poem as his, being too skittish and reticent for an autobiographical work, with the omission of many pithy lines carelessly rejected by him, has to depend entirely on the reality of its author and his surroundings, attachments, and so forth, a reality that only my notes can provide. So, fictionally, this guy is saying that his notes provide necessary context for explaining this poem. And in fact, the poem of this kind has very little meaning without the author being explained. The intent of the author, who the author was, the context of the author. So this is playing with hermeneutics, right? Playing with how we understand a text. Can a text and its meaning stand on its own? Well, 100 years ago, people really began to hypothesize that the author was too distant and too removed, and really we just needed to focus on the text on its own. Can this poem, titled Pale Fire, have meaning without the context of the fictional character, Mr. Shade? Well, absolutely it can. but the fictional commentator believes that it can't be. Furthermore, he wants to insist that you recontextualize the poem into his notes, so that his notes become the proper context by which one can read the poem. In fact, the notes become of such importance, you read them, he encourages, twice, 3 times, maybe even as necessarily cutting them out to match them up along with the words and lines of the poem, or even buying 2 copies. So the awareness of intertextuality, of what a text is, of the interpretation of the text, is already baked into the context of the novel Pale Fire. Let alone it's the way the film imbibes it, brings it in, and holds it up for contemplation within the context of Blade Runner. Now, for me, having read Pale Fire second and seeing the movie first, as I sat down to read the book, this is how intertextuality works, right? I sit down to read the text, but I'm thinking about how does this relate to the film? How do the image or the ideas present in Pale Fire engage the ideas in Blade Runner? So that this book, what's happened to this book on a larger scale now, is already what the make-believe writer of the commentary was doing, which was saying, read this in the context of my work. Blade Runner says, read this text, or not, in the context of this work. The trace then, the trace of meaning, moves from ideas on a page to ideas in a film and back again into the context of me now talking to you in the film. But no, the movie opens up with heavy cityscapes and a farm where Joe first gets into conflict with another replicant. But there's many instances and sequences in that film of snow, as though a white fountain from the sky. But within the first 20 lines of the poem Pale Fire, it says this: covered my glimpse of lawn and reached, and how delightful when a fall of snow covered my glimpse of lawn and reached up so, as to take chair and bed exactly stand upon that snow out in that crystal land. Retake the falling snow, each drifting flake, shapeless and slow, unsteady and opaque, a dull dark white against the day's pale white, the abstract larches in the natural light, and then the gradual dual blue, as night unites the viewer and the view. And in the morning diamonds of frost express excitement, whose spurred feet have crossed from left to right the blank page of the road. So, as a fascinating case of intertextuality, I've seen the movie first. I come back to read this text, and within the first 20 lines, I'm invited to envision snow falling and the way it changes the scenery. The way I think about the view, it mentions the view and the viewer. Is the view there without the viewer? Absolutely, though it wouldn't be a view. But the view then exists inside the viewer and simultaneously beyond the viewer, just as the film and the text. But it's not enough. Earlier on, before the text is even directly held up to the screen in the movie, Joe, while he's getting debriefed after his moment of violence early on, he quotes this line repeatedly under much duress. And blood black nothingness began to spin, a system of cells interlinked within cells, interlinked within cells, interlinked within one stem. And dreadfully distinct against the dark, a tall white fountain played. So Joe, in the film, is debriefing, proving whatever core of his character is stable as a replicant. But these lines are quoted in a completely new setting beyond the construct of this text, talking about connections. community and meaning. For as humans, we derive meaning from community. Our language without communal reference and meaning is nothing. But what's interesting about this sequence in Pale Fire, I got an ant crawling on my cheek. What's interesting about this scene in Pale Fire is that this is a vision that Professor Shade has while addressing an audience about the value of poetry, about why poetry is meaningful to us. And at one point, a man stands up to address him, and Dr. Shade seems to have some sort of fit, epileptic, a heart attack, seizure, and has a vision. He believes he's died, and he communicates that with others. And then when he died, he has this vision of a white fountain of cells interlinked. I realized, of course, he says, that it was made not of our atoms, that the sense behind the scene was not our sense, and life, the mind of any man, is quick to recognize natural shams, and then before his eyes the reed becomes a bird, the knobby twig an inchworm, and the cobra head a big wickedly folded moth. But in the case of my white fountain, what it did replace, perceptually, was something that I felt could be grasped only by whoever dwelt in the strange world where I was a mere stray. So, there you have it. An astounding and interestingly profound case of intertextuality within intertextuality. An invitation to seeing meaning in a film through the eyes of a book earlier written, and to see meaning in a book through the eyes of a film released only recently. All from the view of the viewer. Is the commentary necessary? Does the text have meaning even without the context of an author? Does the text have meaning only within the semiotic system of the viewer? Thank you. Keep rocking. Kick ass.